Hello and welcome to today's session on ASNZS 61439. My name is Evan Willemse, Application Engineer for NHP Electrical Engineering Products. We'll be discussing the standard in general and answering FAQs, and we are joined by Jason Glasgow from Brisbane and Jeff Davis from Melbourne in order to achieve this. Please feel free to submit additional questions via the Q&A facility, and if we don't cover them during the session, we'll get to them at the end, with time permitting. Welcome to today's session, gents.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Awesome. So between the two of you, you have more than a few decades worth of industry experience, and I promise I'm not alluding to your age at all. So I'm going to start with a nice easy one. Jason, can you tell us a little bit about your industry experience, how long you've called NHP home, and your current position with NHP?
No worries. I started my apprenticeship in the coal mines in central Queensland. I worked up there for roughly 8 years. Got married, decided to move to Brisbane and join the switchboard industry down here. I did that for a number of years and then decided to jump the ship and go to a supplier. NHP were offering, so I moved there 17 years ago. Started off in estimating. Graduated over into manufacturing, so looking after workshops and building panel boards, control panels, etc. Around 3.5 years ago, I took my current role, which was technology specialist for switchboard systems, looking after, at the moment, Queensland and Northern Territory.
Now, that's an impressive tenure, Jace. I can only imagine that you've seen many, many changes to the industry over the past 17 years in your career. And specifically in Queensland with mining as well. So I know that NHP is a sales organization and proudly so. When I was an NHP customer many years back, I was always impressed by the resources that were available to me just by contacting my local rep on a wide range of topics from automation to power quality, you name it. So with this in mind, and for our audience, can you expand a little bit about what a technology specialist within the NHP group is as opposed to a BD or a rep?
I can. So a technology specialist doesn't actually have a customer base per se, as a business development rep does. We're used as a resource, and that could be either with the BDs, with our end users, with our consultants, our switchboard builders, depending what industry we're with. Into the wholesalers if we need. We're available for presentations and upskilling of staff, and obviously spreading our knowledge as best we can into the industry.
Fantastic. So it sounds like you're basically tasked with spreading the message on the technology. And from what you alluded as well, there's not only one discipline that this is restricted to. So you are a technology specialist on switchboards. I know that we have many other TSS guys in a wide range of power automation. So thanks for that clarification. And then Jeff, can you tell us a little bit about your industry experience, how long you've called NHP home and your current position with NHP, please?
I've been in the electrical industry since 1975 when I started in heavy industry. So I've been around heavy industry and large switchboards all my life. This is my second stay with NHP, 10 years the first time, and I've worked for all the major suppliers. And I've been here back at NHP 8 years this time round. And I work as a business development manager. So my customer base is consulting engineers and large companies, basically looking at designing of equipment.
Before we dive into the topic of 61439, and it also sounds like you've been around the block a few times, Jeff, I'm sure you would have seen many, many changes in your tenure. I'd actually like to go just off track slightly and hit you guys with a few multiple choice questions just to get to know you a bit better. So I'm going to ask a series of choices, and if you can just yell out your choice with Jason, you first, and then Jeff for each multiple choice. So are the contestants ready?
Yes.
Here we go. Dinosaurs or dragons?
Dinosaurs.
Dragons.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Whiskey, rum or bourbon?
Whiskey.
Depends on the weather, but rum.
Electric vehicle or muscle car?
Muscle car.
Of course, muscle car.
Rugby or AFL?
Rugby,
AFL, Melbourne.
no question.
Thanks for indulging me there, gents, and that definitely gives us some critical insight into who we are talking with today. So thanks for that. Moving on to the topic of ASNZS 61439. What does it mean?
It's a new standard that replaces the old 3439 standard. It was introduced to be more black and white than the 3439. It was a little bit vague in some areas, with an approach to make the industry more consistent, and obviously safer in that regard as well.
Awesome. And you, Jeff?
61439 is a much more engineered document. It provides a lot more detail on verification and how to test and the procedures.
What I can see as well from the adoption of the old standard to the new equivalent, 3439 section 1, type tested assemblies and partially type tested assemblies, and then the new equivalent has kind of got 3 sections, 0, 1 and 2, which is the guide to the new ASNZ. We've got some general rules and power, switchgear and control. So if we look at type tested assemblies and partially type tested assemblies, how do we now do that with the new standard, moving over from 3439 to 61439?
Well, the European and basically everybody that used the IEC standard had an ongoing issue with type tested and partially type tested, because the original standard was written in such a way that it allowed for misunderstanding of that point. So for the last 15 years, we haven't done type tested and partially type tested correctly. So the move from partially type tested and type tested was to remove that from the vocabulary and install a new way of doing it, which is verification, which in the long run is a better way of doing it, because every part of the design has a set of criteria that needs to be verified that it complies with the standard. So, and it gives you a number of ways. So quite quickly it becomes easy for a switchboard builder to verify a switchboard either via a number of ways or by tests, and this verification has taken over and it's applied evenly across the whole standard. It's not this is a type tested device and then we use some bits and it's partially type tested. It's a verification. As long as you can verify you can do it, you can do it.
Okay, guys, let's talk about the clarification of responsibilities on 61439. Clearly, there are different responsibilities for each party. Jeff, can you highlight them for us, please?
Okay, each party has a set of responsibilities they must carry out. Specifiers need to carry out their responsibilities to carry out a detailed specification of the board using a table that is in the specifier's guide of 61439. Then the original equipment manufacturer, their responsibility is to manufacture the system or switchboard, have all the tests and verification done. And then if a third party is going to build it, which would be the assembler must manufacture it to the original equipment manufacturer's requirements as per their instructions, and then carry out independent tests before it's delivered to the electrical contractor. And the device manufacturer that supplies devices to the assembler then has to ensure that any device supplied is tested and carries certification for whatever level is required for the switchboard.
Wow, that's nice and clear. Thanks, Jeff. Now, moving on to NHP's responsibilities, we have switchboard systems like Cubic that help switchboard builders reach that 61439 standard. What are our responsibilities as the provider of the Cubic, and then also obviously of switchgear that goes into switchboards, please?
Because we're an OEM or a supplier of switchgear, as well as a switchboard system, we're deemed to be the original equipment manufacturer. So we take responsibility for the original equipment in Australia, even though it's a third party that we sell. And our requirements are to ensure that that switchboard builder understands it and builds it as per the documentation that's provided with the equipment. And because we also supply the switchgear, our responsibility is to ensure that the switchgear is compliant in the facility or the assembly that we're selling the contractor. And then the contractor's the switchboard builder's responsibility is to build it according to the instruction manual, according to our instructions, and then do their set of verifications, which they must do as an assembler, assembling the switchboard before they can then on-sell it.
Let me put this back to you, Jace. Let's say, for example, since 2016, obviously we've been talking about the standard is now being put in place and we've got this sunset clause until 2021. What are some of the common questions that you got asked initially and are still getting asked now, in that we're 4 years into it, with regards to going from 3439 to 61439?
I guess the big one we're seeing is and as we alluded to with type testing and partial type testing, we're still getting asked for type tested 61439 boards.
Yep.
They don't exist. We're looking for a design verified 61439 board in the correct terminology. I guess some of the big changes are, do my old type tests meet the requirements of the new standard? In most cases they will, if it was done correctly in the first place. So within NXD of 61439, we have our 13 characteristic steps that we need to verify. We have clauses and sub-clauses within these different characteristics. We then have the verification options within that table of testing, comparison to a reference design or assessment / calculation, depending on the characteristic we're trying to meet. And depending on the table, we have one or all options available.
That makes sense. Thanks, Jace. Guys, what I'm going to do now is something slightly different. I'm going to play a recording between one of our TSS colleagues in Melbourne and a switchboard builder. So we'll listen to the questions that we have and then put them to you to answer.
G'day, Steve. How are you, mate?
Yeah, good, Phil.
Yeah, that's good, mate. Just wondering if you had a couple of questions for us in regards to 61439, the new standard, and anything that you wanted to get clarified.
The first one that came to mind was, I guess, testing. I've had a client ask me what's offered in an FAT as part of a switchboard, a complete switchboard. So I had a look through the standard, couldn't find a lot on it. Look, may come back to AS3000 somewhat, but that was just a question I thought I'd raise.
Any other questions? Hopefully you got one, maybe another couple for us there.
I guess part of the form factor, the form, let's say 4A, the suffixes I and H, I have found them in the standard. It's a little bit ambiguous, I guess. I wouldn't feel confident in stating I or H without knowing exactly what that means. And from the standard, I'm not satisfied in making that claim, I guess.
Okay. So just a bit of further clarification on the IH, is that right?
Yeah, the suffixes, yeah.
Okay. Anything else that you wanted to add before we hand these over to our team?
Yeah, one last one. I'm not a big fan of it, but the colour orange. I'm not sure why we use orange in our industry. To me, it's a bit of an eyesore, but I just thought I'd ask for any sort of clarification with that.
Perfect, mate. Well, I'll hand them on and we'll see how we go and hopefully get some answers back for you.
All right, that'd be great, Phil.
No worries. Thanks, mate.
All right, guys. So I think I'll start off with the third one first, which it's a bit comical. This orange. So before I let you guys answer, this kind of evokes an image for me. I don't know if you guys have ever watched the MTV series Pimp My Ride. Essentially, they would choose someone's really old wrecked car and then build it up. And in the show, they would sit down and kind of divvy up the tasks of who was modifying what. And without fail, when they got to the spray paint job, the guy would always kind of say, we're going to do realistic flames on the side. And sometimes he was shut down, sometimes he wasn't. So I don't want to make it sound like we've got one of those guys in our industry, but it does sound like the color orange is not widely accepted by. Where did this come from? Let's start with you, Jeff. The color orange, tell us about it.
From my understanding, and if you speak to everybody in the industry, there's lots of different takes on this, and Jason might correct me, but it basically came out of the mining industry, I believe, to identify electrical cabinets from other equipment in the market or in the mine site. Jason, would you have a comment on that?
That's my understanding too, Jeff.
Yeah.
I think at the moment it was seen as a point of difference for switchboard colours to identify switchboards. I think a lot of the time now it's just a cut and paste. We've always done it that way, so that's the way we go. From a cubic perspective, they make grey for everyone in the world. In Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa use orange.
So that just sounds like it's one of the quirks that. So I guess we can say that there's no requirement for 61439 to use a specific color of switchboard, and that the majority of our industry maybe has adopted this orange because of massive mining industry or identification, as you guys said. But can you clear that up for me? It doesn't have to be orange.
No, it doesn't have to be orange. It's a customer's choice. And in fact, when we get into commercial environments and hospitals, there's another choice for purple as being UPS equipment. So any switchboards that are backed up by UPS, they like to see purple as the colour. And I believe this is where orange has come from. It became as an identification, and now it's just become an electrical standard.
Well, it sounds like there's definitely a gap in the market for guys that want to do custom vinyl wraps on their switchboards. I don't think we'll ever get to that level, but at least we can be assured that we're not stuck to a color choice. So I'm going to go to question 1, and I'll put this one to you, Jace. Steve was asking around documentation around FAT testing. So we spoke about responsibilities of the assembler. Is there anything in the standard that can help the guys from a FAT point of view when a customer comes to look at a board?
No, there's not. Not per se. It mentions that it can be suggested or can be a requirement if the end user specifies it. Along the same lines, they specify that a board needs to be design verified, and there's no documentation as to what format that should take. It's up to the individual assemblers. So no, there's no. Again, with FAT testing, it really depends on the end user or the consultant as to what they actually want to see and at what stages they want to see it. It could be as simple of the board's completed, I want to see it functional. It could be that they want to actually see it in stages of frames going up, bus bar systems in, etc., etc.
Sure. And it does sound like there's a degree of flexibility there, and that the guys, you know, as part of that FAT test, like you say, they could do a staged one, but it's really up to them. But I guess critical to the process would be that you are actually designing and building to that 61439, which is not dependent or independent of a FAT test. It just means that the guys have the freedom to go. So the answer to Steve's question is no, there is no specific FAT format. That's open between the end user and the board builder. But again, use the documentation that you have to make sure that you're up to scratch.
That's correct. And the same with the design verification. There's no format. Each assembler will come up with their own, primarily based off the 13 points that are required to be verified. Some consultants want to just see a statement to say this board complies with 61439. Others want to see actual documentation in the background.
All right, fantastic. And then I'll move on to question number 2. So this was around the forms. Jeff, I'll ask you about this one because I'm guessing that this also ties in with the adoption of moving from the IEC standard to our standard. So tell us a little bit about the suffix I and H, the difference between the two, and you know, why would we even need to look at that, if you don't mind?
Okay, well, firstly, in the IEC standard, they don't use the suffix I and H. They only use the standard form ratings.
Okay.
The Australian standard was introduced the suffix I and H. IEC are looking at integrating it into their standard, but at this point it's still not used. So this is purely an Australian standard, or an Australian addition to the standard. The I and H refers to housing. So if we had a chassis that was housed in a mechanical, hard, rigid plastic housing that surrounded all the bus bars, that's the H suffix. So anything surrounded by a hard, rigid, usually capable of dealing with the temperatures and stresses that might be exhibited through when a short circuit happens. Anything in that housing is classed as a H. The housing of a breaker, as long as the terminals for a circuit breaker are inside the physical housing of the breaker, the plastic moulding of the breaker, that's deemed to be a H. The insulation, or I is the insulation. It's anything that will be insulated using an insulation that is to the Australian standards for 240, 400 volt use. So it needs to have a 3 kV impulse rating. So cables that come into a cubicle, the insulation is deemed to be the I of the insulation. So if you put heat shrink over terminals, it needs to be of the correct heat shrink type and capable of 3 kV impulse test. It then forms the I in the suffix. So I is for insulation and H is for housings.
I'd also like to just cover off on the size of the switchboard. So what is covered within the standard with regards to the different methods of verification, and how big can switchboards go?
Essentially, we cover all switchboards. It is broken down into 61439.3, which covers DBOs or distribution boards operated by ordinary persons. So that's up to 250 amp main switch. There's an incomer with 125 amp outgoer. There is a section in there related to load centers as well for domestic use. But essentially, if it's a switch in a box, it's covered by one of the sections of the standard. There are some requirements that aren't. For example, short circuit withstand, which isn't required if the board doesn't exceed 10 kA. Still needs to meet the other 12 steps of design verification. Or there's also, if it's a 17 kA with a current limiting device, it's an exception as well, but all other steps within the verification process need to be followed.
Okay, so it sounds like we're not limited to size, but there is a bit of clarification in the standard there within certain ranges what we need to do.
Correct, and there is a little bit of a hang up from the AS3000 section related to 800 amps. 800 amps relates to the requirement for segregation to protect against arc fault. A lot of people seem to think, or there is some thinking within the industry that if I build a board under 800 amps, I don't need to be meet the requirements of the standard, which is incorrect.
Okay.
Well, actually, Jason, right as it stands right at this point in time, from a legal point of view, under most jurisdictions in Australia, 61439 applies from everything from the domestic switchboard in your house through to an 8,000 amp board. There are some changes afoot to deal with separate domestic, but right at this point in time in most jurisdictions, you should be complying to 61439 across the board.
Jeff, I've also heard that 61439 is essentially written around indoor boards. Can you expand on that a little bit, please?
61439 is primarily written and designed around indoor boards. There are some applications where they talk about IP rating and UV ratings for equipment, but there is no testing inside the standard for an external board, and there is no current standard for solar gain temperature rise testing in switchboards.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Jeff. Gents, I'm going to actually switch over now. We've obviously had a whole bunch of pre-questions and pre-FAQs. The Q&A forum has actually been quite active. I'm really glad to see that, because that will actually enable us to probably do a follow-up series. I'm going to ask a few questions that have come through from the Q&A forum, and some of them we might be repeating, but let's just go ahead. So I've got one here. Jeff, I'll ask you this one. If I have got quoted switchboard, and this is a type tested according to AS3439 and site specs have reflected to be compliant against 61439, what extra documentation do I need to request from the OEM?
Okay, you'll need to gain what test certificates the OEM has, what tests have been done, and ask him to verify if his tests under 3439 can be carried over and substantiated against the testing under 61439. Most of the original tests, if they were done correctly, are able to be carried across to 61439. It's just a matter of getting the documentation from the OEM.
Okay, well, that sounds reasonable. And then, Jace, I might put this one across to you. We've got one that's coming from Martin. Can you install a cubic enclosure inside a custom weatherproof enclosure, not tested?
The short answer is yes, you can, but as Jeff alluded to before, the standard is really built or written around indoor boards. There isn't a lot in there in relation to what's required for sticking boards outside or inside other cabinets. So again, it would need to be an agreement between the end user consultant and yourselves as to what testing is required, and particularly in relation to heat rise.
Okay, fantastic. And then here's another one. Who signs off the design verification? Is it just basically making sure that you have all of your documentation in order in the event that it gets inspected or verified, or is there actually a sign-off process? I'll put that one to you, Jeff.
Depending on some of the tests are self-certification, but most of the tests you will need to do through a NATA authorised laboratory and have them give you the final test certificate for each test.
Okay, fantastic. Now, gents, as I said, I really hope that this would happen today. We've got a fair amount of questions, and I will say to the audience as well, if we don't answer your questions on the Q&A forum today, you can either reach out to your rep directly asking for more information, and please rest assured that we will definitely be doing a follow-up to this series as we get closer to the May 2021 deadline. So with that, coming up to the 11:30 mark, I'm going to say thank you to Jeff and Jason. It was also quite comical finding out about both drinking coffee and muscle cars. Not related, but it does give us a bit of an insight. So thank you both for your time and for everyone dialing in today, and we'll catch up with you next time. Thank you.